Thank you for joining us on Matchcast. This is Chris. We are very happy to be joined today by Sue Reddel. Sue, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me today.
We are very happy to have you. By way of introduction, Sue is a media consultant working with various clients and vendors, providing strategic leadership, guidance, and training in media buying, selling, and cross-platform strategy. She has both big agency experience here in Chicago, as well as some independent work. And these days, she is co-founder of Food Travelist, which is a blog at the intersection of food and traveling. So we are very excited to touch on all these topics and understand a bit more about digital marketing and the marketing industry through your experience. So thanks again, Sue.
You're welcome.
We met Sue through a mutual friend and client of ours, New Balance Chicago, Jeff Mack. And we're always trying to find ways to drive qualified buyers into New Balance Chicago's 5 retail locations. Sue, with her blogging prowess and experience, opened our eyes to the possibilities that might exist for some influencer marketing opportunities that we were exploring with New Balance Chicago. That is how we met. We kept talking. We have a lot of things in common and areas in which we overlap. So very happy to jump right into it. So Sue, let's start, I guess, a little bit chronologically as far as your career goes. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your big agency experience, maybe some of the things that you really loved about it, maybe some of the things you didn't love about it, and just kind of start there?
Yeah, Chris. Interesting. Yeah, I did spend 12 years working at Starcom, which is obviously a very large, a multimedia agency in Chicago. I don't think we've talked about this before, but I should tell you that before I was working at Starcom, I actually worked at a small retail company here in Chicago, and I was their ad manager. So I got some really great experience in working for probably a store very similar to the setup that New Balance Chicago has. They had 7 locations in Chicago, so I had a really good primer, if you will, on retail, advertising, management, everything. Because the company was relatively small, we had a purview into everything that was going on in the company, not just the marketing. I worked directly with the CEO, and so I helped him, figure out where we would open new stores, how the merchandising would go. It was a seasonal business, so I really got a wealth of information and knowledge, during my tenure there. And I worked there for about 8 years before I, took the plunge into working at a larger agency.
What kind of a business was that?
Well, the name of the stores was called FIM stores. It was called Fun in Motion, and they were a seasonal store. So during the Christmas time, we sold Christmas. So if you've ever seen a spot in Chicago where somebody was talking at a very fast pace and getting everything in, those were the spots that we did, to sell Christmas. And then during the summer time, in the spring and summer, we sold patio furniture and swimming pools. So, in the fall, we sold Halloween decorations, so it was extremely seasonal. So you can imagine the strategies that went into that marketing was completely different, than typical retail sales, so it was very interesting. So, we made probably 80% of our profit during the month of December, so, it was kind of a wacky, little business.
Pros and cons to that, I would imagine, as the business owner. You're super excited about December, but there might be other parts of the year where are a little more painful.
Exactly. But on the other hand, it did lead for, time to plan and really get things in your ducks in order, when you did have the downtime. So, we did an immense amount of planning, as you can imagine, during that rush time, because when they came down, they had to go off without a hitch. There couldn't be any second doubts at that time.
Yeah, so a lot of planning involved in that and preparation and kind of an annual cycle. Interesting. So then I would imagine having that kind of access in a small business, work directly with the CEO, feel like you really had a holistic view of everything going on and maybe had some really nice ability to have impacts at a whole business level. And then moving into a bigger agency, or to a big agency, would it be accurate to say that now you have a smaller slice of a bigger job, much more specialized? You're focused on a smaller piece of your clients' businesses. Is that accurate? And what was that transition like?
Yeah, no, that's totally spot on to what happened. I mean, I honestly, I was a little hesitant, in the beginning to jump into a large agency like that. I had a friend who was working there who had suggested I check it out, and I went for to have many discussions with folks there before I actually took the job, and that was my biggest worry, was going from an atmosphere where I did see, I had full autonomy to create the advertising, also work with the merchandisers to figure out what items were going to be going up for sale every day. So I was very, very, very involved. And so I knew if someone something ran in an ad and it worked, I knew right away because we would run our reports and and we had it. The biggest challenge for me when I first went to work at Starcom, the first client I was assigned to was Kellogg's, which, as everyone knows, is a giant,
Yeah.
company. And I was coming in as a, media buyer planner at that point in my career. That was really a very junior level, and so what the plans that I was putting together, the first products I worked on were Rice Krispies, cornflakes, really, long term, products that have been around for, generations, right?
Hmm.
We would put plans together, and we learned the strategies from the brand managers, and we had all the tools. We certainly had tools at the agency to use to make the job a little bit easier, but it was a lot of time and thought went into these plans as well. I mean, we spent months and months putting media plans together, but ultimately when we presented the plans and then they were approved, I never had line of sight to did that particular ad work, what kind of results do we get from that? And I didn't at my level. And it was really interesting because I had a very smart media director at that time when I began in my career. Her name was Karen Jacobs, and I expressed my concerns to her during one of my annual evaluations, and she said, Sue, she said, I understand what your concerns are, but have you done your homework? Have you gone and have you looked at their annual reports? Have you gone and really studied the brands and how are they doing and what's going on in the business? And honestly, I said no. And she said,
Yeah.
well, that's your job to do. That's your homework. And so maybe not everyone was asking those questions because I had that background. And so as people went up the ladder at the agency, they learned those things, but I had kind of already had line of sight to them at my other job, so I was asking them probably a little bit earlier. Ultimately, those kinds of questions and those kinds of projects I ended up doing, because what I ended up doing was doing a project on the annual report of Kellogg's, which you can imagine was was a kind of a lengthy project. But I was able to share that then with the team, and say, okay, this is what I learned. And I think some of them probably thought I was crazy that I cared,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but some of them thought, oh yeah, it's like I want to know how my work is impacting their bottom line. I mean, I think that as marketers, we have to know that, because otherwise, why are we doing what we're doing? We ultimately we want to help them sell product, I hope.
That resonates with us for sure because we're an agency that is constantly asking those questions, and we do almost always have line of sight. And sometimes there's little breaks in your vision, and you have to find ways to fix those. But I think that's a really interesting challenge to you that Karen gave you, back in those days. Around, you can't really complain about not having holistic knowledge of your client's business until you've ingested absolutely everything that's publicly available and that you can. And then when you hit the wall of like, I know everything you can possibly know about the business in the context of working at this very large agency with this very large company, then you can start to be like, hey, I would love to know XYZ thing. I like that feedback from her.
Exactly, and then and it makes you smarter, and it makes you smarter working with the brands, because how can you make them a better brand, right?
Yeah, it's also about self-reliance and being a self-starter and going out and finding those things out for yourself to help your work. So you go from the small business where you have, full visibility of everything to the large agency working with large brands where there's not always line of sight. Did that affect any of your work satisfaction ultimately to not be able to see that direct impact from your work and your hours and your brain power into the client's business?
I would say for the first probably 2 years that I was there, yes. For me, it was a struggle, to get through that first kind of learning curve with them, because at that time, coming into that agency, they typically hired people who were just out of college. that was the way they did it. I'm sure they don't do it that way anymore. And you had to go through their program.
Yeah.
Understandably, you learned their methodologies, you learned all of the resource. I mean, we had an amazing amount of resource tools, and research department that could get you almost anything. So learning that structure, which I didn't have. I mean, think about it. I came from a very small company that we had the resources were anything I could find and anything I could learn about our business, so I was very embedded into the business, and this is kind of the opposite, right? It's like I knew and had all these tools that we could use to to apply to these other businesses, but I didn't know about the businesses. So my goal, once I kind of got over that 2-year hump and kind of worked my way through that ladder, then I could have more line of sight to more insights into the businesses that I was working on. Once I became a supervisor and then, became an associate media director, and then finally, a media director and a VP, as you work through that, that cycle of, moving up the ladder, you definitely get more line of sight into clients' business because you have more access to clients and different levels of clients, at the business, and that's what the goal was. And once I realized that, very early in my career, I said, if I can just get through these 2 years, it's like, I know that I can be really good here. And I can do a lot of really great work, and once I realized that, then I was okay with it, and what really makes it rewarding at a job like that is the people along the way. It's like I mentioned Karen, but I had so many other great mentors along the way, that, and again, like Karen, I'm still friends with Karen, and I would still had no problem asking her a question about something, because there were great resources of not just, tools, but people that had been in the business for many years and experienced many, different scenarios with clients and products and brands, that you don't get when you're at smaller age.
Right. So a little bit of a challenge in the transition. That was really interesting to hear you explore that and tell that. And then some really great relationships and people that came out of it. What other things in the big agency life did you really enjoy? And as you look back on, you have found fond recollections of?
Number one is always the people. The teams that I worked on, the teams that worked for me, were, always, to me, the thing that made me get up every day and want to go to work. It's like, and we also got to work on fantastic brands, right? And it's like, I also was very fortunate, and I got to work at Starcom during a time when when we had the first tech boom. So I was working on, I can't tell you how many, but dozens of tech clients, probably in the first year that the tech boom happened, that would come and go and come and go, and people that had so much money to spend, and that wanted to put money down right away. It's like I worked in the media business where, people put together plans. You spend a lot of months planning them, then you put the money in the market, and you move things. People were coming in the door saying, I want to spend this, $1 million today. It wasn't what we were used to at all, and certainly wasn't the usual structure. And so, but we figured it out, and went along with it. Of course, very shortly after that became, the crash, right?
The money
all
was
that
all
money
gone.
went away. All those businesses went away. So literally, I had one client that I called one day and they weren't there anymore. That's wacky, right? It's like,
So having a front row seat to some of those kind of bigger picture kind of evolutions in business sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, it was. And it was great. And I got the chance to do that and work on the tech side, which kind of helps me in my job now, but then I also got the opportunity to go back, kind of into the, regular consumer pool. And I worked on Miller Coors the last, 7 years that I was at Starcom, which again put me back into more structure, and more, a real true, brand experience, working with brand managers, who had a lot of experience in the beer business. I learned a ton from them, and we had a great team, at Starcom that worked on that business.
So you mentioned how the technology you learned about helps you a bit now, and you're working on Miller Coors. Is it a food item? I guess beer is a food
Sure.
item for some of us more than others. How did your transition out of the agency world go? I know that you had some independent work that you still do, and then it transitions to food travelers. Can you take us through those steps? Because it's so interesting that in this one person here, dear listeners, we have such a wealth of experience of all these transitions of the different ways in which you can work in the marketing world.
Well, I would tell you, when I first made the transition out of the agency, I was a slow starter, if you will. I was very fortunate in that I had, created a lot of really great relationships with folks while I was at the agency. So I had several clients right off the bat, and people who wanted to work with me. And so, I very slowly started building a, private practice, if you will, of, for my media business. And I would say that probably the biggest challenge right out of the box was not having resources, because all of a sudden it was just me,
Yeah.
and it's like, how was I going to do that? I remember the very first person who called me said, I literally wanted to take a couple months off before I started working, with other businesses and other things. And this one gentleman just kept calling me, kept calling me. He's like, please, it's like, finally I was like, fine, okay, fine. Like, in 2 months I will come and, he wanted me to do this presentation for him. And he said, okay, I'll do that. And so I started putting the presentation together. No big deal. I had certainly put together many presentations in the past. That wasn't an issue for me. But then all of a sudden I sat down, I was done with the presentation. I said, oh my goodness, now someone has to make the copies. Someone has to make sure everything works on the, I said, I was very privileged. And then I always had an assistant, a very good assistant who I loved dearly, who took care of all that stuff. And so I didn't even stop and think, oh my gosh, I actually have to go to Kinko's or,
Yeah.
somewhere and do this work, myself, because I didn't have the capability at that time, to do it myself in my office. I do now, but I didn't at that point. And so that was my first awakening to the real world of, oops, you're on your own now, kid. So, how are you going to do this and how are you going to manage that?
Yeah, well, a couple things as a small agency owner and others who are in similar seats can appreciate. That's a nice problem to have somebody continually calling you and saying, please do work for me, please do work for me. That's a good problem.
Yes, indeed.
And then at the same time, it strikes me that before we started our agency and got a little bit bigger to where we are now, I think all of us who have worked independently have that same experience of, okay, I just sold this job. Now I have to do all the work myself. And not only that, but then, you have to collect and you have to follow up and you get
Yeah.
feedback when the job ends. And there's just like, it's just almost too much for one person to do. And I would imagine, I don't know exactly what year this was that you're describing, but just these days there's so many more tools that are readily available for free or cheap than there were, I would imagine, 10 years ago, if that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, we're talking about 8 years ago. Yeah, I mean, now obviously there's virtual assistants, and a lot of people that that are available to do that kind of work. That at that point in time, I had no clue about. I mean, I've certainly my learning curve had to be really fast. In terms of what was I going to do and what wasn't I going to do. I mean, and obviously, like we've discussed too. I mean, sometimes there are things that I can't do, and I have to offline to someone else who I can trust, that will do that piece of work, for me, that we can either present together to the client or I can take and present to the client, so,
Right.
those types of things that came up along the way, it's like, and I was also lucky too, because I mean, when I left the corporate world, I also had a gig teaching at Roosevelt University. I love to teach, and my background in Starcom also included a lot of training. So to me, that was a natural, fit for me. And ever since I've been out of the agency, I've continued to teach at Roosevelt. Which is to me, it keeps my brain really functioning at a very high level. At with these kids, I shouldn't say kids, students, who are always bringing new ideas and challenging the ideas that I put forth to them, which makes me smarter. So I really enjoy that part as well.
That sounds like a great supplement. So, with all these changes we're describing, you're talking about staying on the cutting edge through students and this constant exchange that you have with them. Talked a bit about how tools that are more available now for us to do this kind of work, whereas in the past, those things were not as well developed or as readily available. And I know that this might be more your conjecture because you're not at a big agency anymore, but do you have any sense of how those changes are affecting the big agencies?
Yeah, I mean, from the folks that I know that are still there, and also from what I read, in the trades as well, I believe there's less people, at the agencies that are doing more work. I think when I was there, we had this what we used to call this, this luxury, because we had this all of these people, able to. I always just say to people that worked on my team, if there's ever a problem, bring it to my attention right away, because we can literally solve any problem very quickly. It could, because we can just put our energies and we can put staff against it. So I don't think that luxury exists anymore. That having a huge staff that you can trust will be there to do that. So I think that's definitely one issue. I think also clients have always been clients, right? Clients always want the best work. They always want, they're paying top dollar, especially at a large agency, so they want, the best talent. They want great work, but I think in this environment, they also want to know their return. And that wasn't always the case. I mean, may sound kind of odd right now. People are going, what? It's like people are spending millions of dollars and they don't know what they're going to get in a return. It's like, no, there wasn't always a great metric, to figure out like cost, on return, as there is now, more so now with digital.
Right. Well, even now you can measure a lot better, but it's hard to say that it's ever perfect. And if you're Kellogg's and spending $1 million, how do you see that in the throughput of Rice Krispies at retail grocery stores? Like that's still kind of nebulous, I would imagine. I'm speculating a bit. Anyway, speaking of Rice Krispies and beer, let's get to what I most associate with you currently, in my limited understanding, which is food Travela. So you're outside the big agency. You're just through your network and your experience, your talents. You're picking up clients here and there to do work. You are also teaching at Roosevelt. How did food Travela come about, and where has it taken you?
Well, that is a great question, Chris, because just looking from the outside, people might say, well, yeah, you just started doing that because you like to travel and you like to eat. It's like, yes, I do. Like that's true. But oddly enough, there is a kind of a rationale of how this thing all started. When I first left Starcom, I was gone maybe 2 or 3 months, and I got a call, from one of my old bosses and saying, hey, that they had an opportunity for a consultant, to come in and do some training, which he knew I was, very happy to do because that's in my very strong core of abilities, and said, would you be interested in coming in and talking to us about this client, and doing some training? I said, well, and he said, don't worry, it's not a job, because he knew, that I wasn't, really looking to come back to the agency full time, and he said, let's talk about it. I said, okay, I'd love to talk to you about it. And he said, but there's a big downside to this job. And I said, oh, well, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what could it possibly, maybe it's a horrible client, I was like, what could it possibly be, and he said, well, the problem is the client has offices all over the world, and the person who goes, to do this training would have to travel a lot. And I was like, oh,
what kinds of places?
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
what
it's
kinds
kind
of
of
places
like,
would we travel to?
if he could have seen my face on the phone, he would have seen this puzzlement of like, why is that a problem? Because I love to travel, and I always love to travel. And in fact, one of the reasons that I left the corporate world was in my lack of control over my time, right?
Yeah.
And only being able to go on serious traveling when I was on my vacation time. Even though I must say, with all respect to Starcom, we had an extremely generous compensation program and time program, so we had a lot of vacation, a lot of time off, but I still wanted more travel, so anyway. I ended up taking this gig. I literally traveled all over the world, and I had the gig for 3 years. The client, had this training program. It was myself and like 4 other consultants, who put together a training program for them to learn how to work better with the agencies that they were working with. So it was a great program for them because they got to be smarter in how they worked with agencies. Because sometimes people coming in as brand managers or junior brand managers didn't, or even just marketing positions, didn't really know the structure or understand how agencies worked. And how many people were involved in decision making, and how, what should they expect to get from them? How should they then critique it? All the types of things that they may not know, coming in. And it was actually very smart on their end, to prepare their people like that, right? And so we did that, for 3 years, and I got to go to a lot of amazing places. I got to go to places you would probably suspect, that are business meetings: London, Paris, Rome, things, places, Madrid. But then I got to go to kind of like off the, what people call off the grid, places, like Kazakhstan. I've been to Almaty, which I can't, a lot of people haven't been there,
No, I haven't.
And Kiev. I've been to Dubai, Jordan, Vietnam, Singapore, China, Turkey, it's like, so the list just kind of goes on and on, so it was a great experience. But the long answer to your question is that job was the impetus of Food Travelist, because I learned really early on when I was traveling that I could have a great experience in these meetings and teaching people about how to do their jobs better. But then sometimes I'd be by myself and I would, have to go out to eat and whatnot. And I learned how to do that. And that was great and wonderful. And I got to, usually I was in and out of markets pretty quickly, because I'd have to go to another meeting. But in the time I was there, I could really learn a lot about the culture. But the best way to do that was through the food and to eating with people. And honestly, what really sparked the idea was I was in Dubai for a meeting, and I met a colleague there, from the Starcom office in Dubai, and we were chatting, and he said, "Oh, when are you leaving?" I said, "I'm flying out tomorrow morning." He said, "Well, I would like to take you out to dinner tonight." And I said, "Oh, no, 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 we've been here all day. It was a long day." I said, "I'm sure you want to get home to your family." And he said, "No, you're in my country. I insist." That we go out to eat. And I said, okay. I said, yeah, I'll meet you, downstairs in the lobby of the hotel at whatever, 6 o'clock. And so I was so pleasantly surprised when I went downstairs, he was there to pick me up, but his wife was there and their young child.
Oh, cool.
So we went out and they took me out to this, gorgeous restaurant, in Dubai. It was part of a very large like hotel, complex. And I have to be honest, I didn't know what to expect with the food. I didn't know it's like we were there in Dubai in the summertime. It was like 120 degrees, and he said, we're going to go eat at this restaurant that's outside. And I thought, my Midwestern self said, oh my Lord, it's going to, how am I going to survive that? And so we went into the restaurant, and it was really amazing because we walked out into this courtyard, and the first thing you're struck with is everything's open at the top. You see the stars, it's gorgeous, they've got the palm trees, everything's going on. But the thing that's very odd is it's not hot. It's like, okay, we just went from the car into the hotel and it was steamy just in that 10 steps that we walked into the hotel. But like, why is this not hot here?
Why not?
Well, it was air conditioned.
Outdoor air conditioning, only in Dubai. Huh?
Only in Dubai, and we had a wonderful meal. They walked me through the menu. I had some great things I had not, eaten before. We told some great stories. They asked me about Chicago. They asked me about, the United States, and we kind of dispelled myths about each other's cultures that we both were surprised about. His wife, was fascinated with Chicago, and because at that point Oprah was still here. And so she was, do you know Oprah? Yeah, no, I don't.
I know of her. I feel like I know her. I've never met, but I feel like I know her.
Spots on her show. Does that count? It's like, so, yeah. So it was cute, but we had a great meal. And that was, to me, it's like, if we could come together and have this great meal and understand each other a little bit more. I mean, here we are I was in a Middle Eastern country. People were telling me, you're nuts to go there alone. Aren't you scared? Everything. And I can tell you, I couldn't have felt more safe, in a country than I did when I was there, especially with them. And honestly, that happened, probably like 6 years ago. We're still friends.
That's awesome.
We keep up with each other. Of course, now with Facebook makes it all much easier, right? They have now another child, and it's all wonderful, and then that to me, so having that meal with them, it kind of sparked something of, how is this important? Well, it's important because, people that travel, need to learn about the culture through food.
Yes.
So that's when we started, Food Travelist, because, really the core goal of Food Travelist in the onset was world peace. Small goal, right?
Yeah, small, very not ambitious at all, soon.
No, because we said that if people could come together around a meal and understand each other a little bit better, we hope to make the world a little bit better place. And so that's where we are today with Food Travelist.
That's awesome. Wait, so we got world peace?
We're getting there. I hope, little by little,
It's good. It's good to hear this optimism. So that is amazing background into the inspiration and the genesis and your purpose of Food Travelist. Let's flash forward to today or kind of a more recent time. Can you encapsulate a little bit some of your favorite connections you've made, apart from the wonderful world peace, humans getting to know each other angle, but from like maybe a brand perspective? Are there any brands or examples of kind of campaigns that you've done through Food Travelist that connected, whatever it's the food to the location, whether there's a brand that's pushing this with you? Do you have any good kind of case studies that you could share with us briefly about some campaign that encapsulates Food Travelist?
I mean, in fact, there's one that, we just finished up yesterday. We've done work with them in the past. Hong Kong Tourism is a brand that we work with. And We have a chat that we run on every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. on Twitter that's called a hashtag, food travel chat.
Hmm.
And we started it 2 years ago as an adjunct to the site because we were getting good traction on the site. Brands were interested in us, but it was like we wanted to really create a community around food travelists. People that really love to travel and really love to explore the food. When they traveled, but also they explored the food before they traveled. It's like I
Yeah.
want to go to Turkey because I know I can have the best shawarma there. It's like, so it's like, what were the things that people were traveling for? We started a food travel chat and slowly, built a community around that. And so every single Wednesday night, we have these chats about a particular topic. And Hong Kong came on with us last year to do a chat, and we did a chat that was called Asian Feasts and Finds. And they were the sponsor, and what that means is we we're very, very kind of, I don't want to say picky, but we are picky about who we choose to sponsor with the chat, because we don't, when we have the chat, we ask 10 questions within the hour, and people interact on Twitter with pictures about food, pictures about places. And so when we have sponsors come on, we tell them this is not about you coming on and saying buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, and constantly, hey, don't forget about Hong Kong, and don't forget
Yeah.
about Hong Kong. It's like, and so and then brands have been really receptive to that. It's like we're not saying we don't want you to to tell your story, but we want it to be in a very integrated way, in a way that doesn't hit somebody smack in the face. And so, the first one we did, it was really interesting because, people love Asian food just in general. I mean, not just Hong Kong, but we're talking Indian food, Chinese food, Singapore, Taiwanese food, Thai food, you name it. People love, Asian food,
It's
so
delicious.
yes, of course. I mean, there's so many different kinds of flavors too. Everyone is unique and different. And so, the first one we had, people were so excited, to have this, this chat about Asian food, and everything that happens on the chat happens very organically, which is great, and so people, they were sharing some pictures of some food, of course, from Hong Kong. They were sharing some tips about Hong Kong. It's like, I had no idea that there's 42 Michelin restaurants in Hong Kong. So everybody was like blown away by that, and just the little things, the tips that would come out. And then slowly throughout the chat, you could just see there was many people that were saying on the chat, I can't wait to go to Hong Kong. What
Yeah.
hotel should I stay at? It's like, so all of this kind of positive environment of people that are already like-minded, wanting to look for food in new places. We're saying, hey, I'm going to think about Hong Kong now.
And without hitting him over the head with it or kind of forcing it.
Exactly. And we just had, and they were just a sponsor again last night, as a matter of fact. And it's honestly, the same thing happened again, and just really positive feedback about, new ideas. It's like, and we even had some people on the chat last night that are going to Hong Kong. Like, there was, somebody was going next week, somebody's going in a couple of weeks. They're like, these were great ideas. I'm so glad, that I tuned into the chat tonight.
That's so cool.
So that makes us feel good. It's like, yes, of course, I pay attention to the numbers, how many people were on, how many millions of impressions do we get, all that, fun stuff that we look at, and in the aftermath, but to me, the more importantly are the things that people say, the tweets that come out, that are very positive about it, so, we're really looking to expand, food travel chat into something else, along the way with the community that we've built. Our next step, we think, is going to be building a program where we can have these folks, meet up in a destination and actually have like a food travel chat or food travelist destination, and can go there and experience, some new place that they may not have thought about before in a very unique way, where they can, get some different types of cuisine and really get a look into the culture, in the destination in a way that revolves around this culinary travel.
Very cool. Well, so this is getting and I don't know how recent this is, but this is getting the name influencer marketing, and that's again how we were introduced to you through New Balance Chicago. That what you just mentioned, as far as kind of going a step farther for food travelers and having people in the location getting together and discussing food and travel while on site, that seems just like one step deeper into, I guess, authenticity or into the experience. Is that what you see happening in influencer marketing generally? Is it just going to get more and more genuine, I guess, or authentic, or where do you see influencer marketing as if we can even use that term? Where do you see it developing?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that people, especially in the niche that we work in food travel, people want experiences. So they don't want to just read about it. They don't want to just know that you had a great thing or look at your pictures on Instagram and say, oh, that's great. It's like they want to experience that thing or the next thing. It's like, what else is there?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that for us, the natural progression is to actually have people going places, so, and I think that, that will happen, in other niches as well. And also, I think, niches are the way to go, right? It's because everything is going to be coming down to smaller communities, smaller groups, people that are very interested in specific things, rather than, large base ideas, and there's been a lot, and it's in terms of, influencers, there's a lot more influencer networks out there than there ever were. And I'm sure there will continue to be growth in that area. And yes, there are big brands, that use huge influencers. I mean, obviously we've got these YouTubers out there, right? That have huge, audiences, huge reach, that folks watch, religiously.
Yes.
And, for ideas and, things that they, that they're interested in and learning, right? I mean, it's like, YouTube, being the largest search engine that's out there right now, it amazes me. It's like, and this kind of circles back to my time at Roosevelt, that I have students in my, because I also teach in the grad program there. They have students that are a bit older and have children, they're like, their children, the first thing they do when they say, we're going to go and experience this, some kind of entertainment somewhere, they look it up on YouTube first.
Yeah.
And say, yeah, I don't want to do that. That's not cool. Or that looks dumb. Or that looks too babyish for me. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And so it's crazy when 4 or 5, maybe, I don't know, where does it start now anymore? 3, 4, 5-year-olds are making buying decisions, right?
Yeah.
Based on what they see on YouTube.
So as the platforms continue to develop, whether it's a platform like YouTube or a platform that connects influencers to brands, you're seeing continuing niching and continuing kind of getting closer to the experience as people value experiences more and more.
Absolutely.
Well, Sue, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Quick question, and I don't know how quick this can be because it's a big one.
Uh-oh.
But if you had to pick one, where's your favorite place to travel?
No, it's like, Chris, that's like picking your favorite child,
I know. It's not possible. I won't hold you to it. I won't get mad if you mention 2 or 3.
All right. And I hope nobody none of the destinations that I've been to and have adored will hold it against me either.
Yeah.
But I've had the privilege, and I'm so thankful, to be able to go to the places that I have been able to go to. And they've all been amazing. I can't tell you, I've never been anywhere where I've said, oh my gosh, this place is horrible.
Yeah.
But I personally, I have an affinity. I am drawn to France, for some reason, and not just Paris, but everywhere in France. I just love it. I've had a love for France since I've been a little girl, so I remember the very, very first report I ever had to do on a destination I did on Paris, of course, and with no pull from anyone, it wasn't my parents, it wasn't my teacher, it wasn't anybody. It was something that I just had a fascination for. And I can tell you, I've been to Paris many times, and it never grows old for me, but I've also done several driving trips around France, and I just love it. If you had asked me the question, where would you move to?
That would be France.
If you had to, I said, yeah, that would definitely be somewhere in France.
That's amazing. The part about you being a little girl and being kind of drawn to it is interesting to me personally. A very personal, quick tidbit here. I remember my 25th birthday or so, my mom gave me a book of writings that I did when I was in like 2nd grade. At this point in my life, I was living in Costa Rica. And no, I had lived in Costa Rica for a few years, and then I was living in New York City. And I opened up this little book of writings that I did at age like 7, and I'm writing about Manhattan and the jungle. And I was like, oh my Lord. I was 7 years old, already like not obsessed, but these were things that were just, I was really interested in. So it's funny how those things maybe embed themselves in our brains for whatever reason when we're young, and they continue to stay with us.
Yeah, we're going to have to get together again and talk about Costa Rica.
I'd love to. I would love to. I was married there a year ago, almost exactly. And I lived there for years, and it's one of my places that feels like home. So I would love to share my experiences with you. Anyway, Sue, thank you so much. It's been very enjoyable. I think that breadth of experience that you have, big, small, well as the kind of innovative approach that's very entrepreneurial that you're taking now will resonate with all sorts of people, and that kind of breadth again is really helpful to lend perspective to people as they progress on their own journey. So thank you very much again for joining us, and we'll look forward to staying in touch with Sue Reddel.
Thank you, Chris.